Why, hi there. Welcome to Mrs. K's way of teaching you about absolute value and the opposites of integers. We're going to talk about three different things. We are first going to be talking about what are opposites, finding absolute value, and then we're going to compare and order the integers depending on their opposite values and their opposites. Let's first talk about opposites. An opposite is the pair of numbers that are the same distance away from zero, but on opposite sides of zero. So if we take and we made a line right at zero, we have both our positive numbers on the right and our negative numbers on the left. What opposites are, and it's a lot easier to show than to talk in the definition, is if we look at the value of 3, we want a number that is the same distance, 1, 2, 3, away from 0, but we want it to be its negative counterpart. So if we have positive 3, then we know starting here, 1, 2, 3, on the other side of 0, we would get the opposite of negative 3. Thus, we know that negative 3 is the opposite of 3. This also works for negative 1. The opposite of negative 1 is its positive counterpart, which is positive 1. When we're talking about finding absolute value, it seems very similar to opposites, but this time we are only talking about the distance a number is away from 0. So again, if we have our line right here at 0, this is kind of home base. If we're looking at our value of 2, we want to know what the absolute value is. We want to know what the distance 2 is away from 0. So if we start at our integer of positive 2, we can go as many times as we need, 1, 2, to get to 0. So the absolute value of 2 is actually a distance of 2. How we write absolute value is by having a line, straight line, the number, and then a straight line. These are a different set of parentheses. So we know that the absolute value of positive 2 is equal to a distance of positive 2. Now let's look at its opposite. Let's look at negative 2. Well, we're going to still start at negative 2 and count how many times we need to go until we reach 0. 1, 2. That means that we also have a distance of 2. Our distance is always positive, so we don't have to talk about negative 2 being negative 2 steps away from 0. So if we write the absolute value of negative 2, it also will be 2. So it's interesting to know that our opposites, negative 2 and positive 2, have the same absolute value. However, we need to remember that absolute value is always positive, because it's the distance. It's not about being the number value or what side of the number line it's on. It's just about the distance. Let's compare and order with absolute value. So originally, we would just have been comparing the numbers 2 and 4. But now, since we have those absolute value symbols, we want to see which value is greater, the absolute value of 2 or the absolute value of 4. So we just quickly want to be able to see what the absolute value of 2 is and what the absolute value of 4 is. So since we are looking at positive 2, the absolute value is the distance from 0. So our absolute value of 2 is a positive 2. And again, we do this with 4, and we see it is 4 away. So we are actually really comparing positive 2 and positive 4. Since positive 4 is greater, we know that the absolute value of 2 is less than the absolute value of 4. We also can do this for our second example, when now we are dealing with the opposites. Now, if we are looking at our opposites, negative 2 is still a distance of 2 away, and our absolute value of 4 is also still 4 distance away, or 4 units away. So in a way, because these two are opposites, they still have the same absolute value. Same with our others over here. So we, of course, still have that the absolute value of negative 2 is less than the absolute value of negative 4. For our final example, I wanted to show you one other time that you are going to see absolute value signs. but this is when the negative is outside. So as I explained before, having these straight lines for the absolute value, that tells us that these are parentheses. Anything outside the parentheses is telling us opposite. So this actually reads the opposite of the absolute value of -2. So I'm going to first find the absolute value of +2, and then I'm going to take its opposite. So first I want to go for +2. That is a distance of 2 away. And then I want to take its opposite, which is -2. For absolute value of 4, I have 4, and that again is 4 away. And now I'm going to take the opposite of that absolute value. So now I'm actually comparing -2 and -4. Since -2 is closer to 0 than -4, I now know my final answer is that the opposite of the absolute value of 2 is greater than the opposite of the absolute value of 4. It's a tongue twister, but it's just really interesting to know that that negative symbol also represents the opposite. Since we talked about different mirroring and different opposites, that kind of reminded me of this picture of my puppy Callie when she was about 6 months old. As you can see, there is the mirror right here, and if we wanted to think about it, we could think that the mirrored image, the image in the mirror, is the opposite of the actual Callie looking into the mirror. Not only is this part of the lesson, but I just thought it was a really cute picture. Can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. Bye.